Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it may be where you are. This is Scott over at ReadySquirrel.com. I've got an article hot off the press, 37 Reasons Prepping is Not a Waste of Time. You can go over to ReadySquirrel.com and take a look at it, and I'll also post the link down below. We're living in some strange times. It's kind of surreal. It's kind of what prompted me to write this and to think about it. Why you should become a prepper. Well, preppers have gotten a bad reputation. People are going to say you're bat guano crazy if you start prepping. But in my mind, I don't really see a difference between homesteading, prepping, or doing things the way that my grandparents and my great-grandparents did them. People from the Great Depression having a large garden, canning, food preservation. It was just a way of making sure that you could handle hard times. That's all it was. It doesn't have to be, post-apocalyptic. And if I think some people just have fun with that. I have no problem with that. But I think it also turns some mainstream people off to the idea of being prepared for the possibility of hard times. So the best time to start prepping is to start today. It's not a modern idea, and the term prepper has all kinds of baggage attached to it, like we were saying earlier. But 200 years ago, all the way back to the beginning of time, everybody was a prepper. Because if you didn't prepare for a year's supply of food in the spring, you didn't eat during the winter, especially if you were in the more temperate climates in the northern hemisphere. If you were living on an island in the South Pacific, I have to imagine that there were still life cycles with the way the fish spawned and stuff like that made it necessary for you to plan ahead for what you were going to eat. So I define a prepper as a person who prepares for hard times by learning things like homesteading skills or bushcraft skills, learn about storing food, water supplies, and gardening. And then if you desire, you can also collect skills and implements for personal protection. That's a personal choice. By incorporating prepping into your lifestyle, you can create a family environment with less anxiety. I actually have regrets about this. I wish I had gotten my kids more involved in things like gardening and working in the yard when they were young. I didn't. I came to this later in life. So if you have the opportunity to do some homesteading skills with your kids, to do some gardening with your kids, to make apple cider with your own apples, things like that, it's good times, fun times, and it's going to build a closeness and a bond that I think it's hard to get any other way in modern times. You may live in an apartment, you may live in a condo, you may not have a ton of space, but you can still do fun crafts and cool things inside with grow lights and, growing things in small space. There's a lot of books out there on how to do that. And you can also get involved in your local community and join a garden club. So have fun with it. I say here then again, you may want to prepare for the next zombie apocalypse. And of course, that's tongue in cheek. 37 reasons to prepare for an emergency. Well, bad things do happen, and they are unpredictable. There may be a huge event that has everyone running to a bunker, but more than likely, what you're going to face are going to be things in the home. A car breaks down, you lose a job, somebody in your family gets sick, somebody in your family needs help. You build these resources by prepping extra food, extra water, gardening skills, canning skills, what have you. You're really reducing anxiety, and you're offering those around you stability, not just your immediate family. Excuse me. I think modern conveniences have given us a false sense of security. And I think we have a tendency to look at our own lifeline, and if something hasn't happened, then it never will happen, kind of a thing. And we're living in pretty squirrely times right now. And I don't want to get into politics or anything like that, but whatever your leanings are, I think you'd agree that things are squirrely. So I'm listing 37 possible scenarios that might make you want to start preparing for a potential emergency. And of course, not all of these are going to apply to everyone's situation. So there's the big ones, the 12 natural disasters: floods cause extensive property damage and loss of life. Excuse me, I had to take a drink of coffee. The degree of damage caused by flooding is dependent on the volume of water and how long it takes the water to recede. So you guys remember the Midwest floods a couple years ago. That was really bad. But I think a lot of the floods that we have on a regular basis come from groundwater from hurricanes. Flooding often accompanies other natural disasters such as storm surges, hurricanes, or tsunamis. I got ahead of myself there. Flash flooding. One of the scariest things about flash floods, and I actually have experienced seeing a flash flood firsthand, and there was a little girl in my neighborhood when I lived in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert that was actually swept away by a flash flood. You know, you can have a flash flood where it's raining, and you can tell by the volume of rain and the wind that whether or not the area could have flash flooding. But in the desert, you can. We were actually kind of at the foothills of the mountains, and Prescott and Flagstaff were north of us if you look on an Arizona map. And there was snow melt and a rainstorm further up the mountain. And so you can be standing in a dry creek bed. There can be not a cloud in the sky and no rain. And all of a sudden, 5 minutes later, you've got a torrential, massive movement of water going through gullies. And one of the reasons for that is the ground in desert areas doesn't absorb water. That's actually one of the main definitions of what a desert is, and that is that the groundwater just doesn't go into the ground. It runs. So there's nowhere for it to go. And unfortunately, that little girl was in her backyard playing, and she was swept away by a flash flood. So if you ever go to Arizona or the Southwest, or if you're ever in a flash flood, do me a favor and don't try to drive your vehicle across it. Even if it looks like it's 2 inches deep or 6 inches deep, don't do it, because you're going to end up not only putting your life in danger, possibly losing your life, but you're also going to put emergency rescue in danger. Thunderstorms and lightning cause massive blackouts and fires. I live on the East Coast now, and I don't remember ever we have so many blackouts. Our power goes out, I bet 15 times a year. It's ridiculous. I don't remember anywhere else I've lived, whether it be in the Midwest or even on the West Coast, where we had the kind of power outages that we have here. Even if the wind blows heavy, the power goes out. Hurricanes, that's another reason to prep. When hurricanes hit land, they can create massive wind damage and storm surges that push ocean water ashore. And most of the damage that comes from hurricanes is actually caused by, the average hurricane, I should say. A lot of the damage is caused by water, so water surge, and not as much by wind. That depends on the severity of the hurricane, of course. Damage is caused by heavy rains that accompany the rise of ocean water can cause catastrophic flooding also. Tornadoes, lived in Nebraska for a while. Higher the wind speed, the larger the tornado, the more damage caused. An EF5 hurricane. I actually think I did a typo there. I need to go check that out. I have information about a hurricane under tornadoes. Okay. So, yeah, that's a typo. So heat wave, high temperatures cause crop failure, deaths from overheating, widespread power outages. Winter storm, cold temperatures, freezing weather, snow and ice can incapacitate entire regions by shutting down freeways and knocking out electrical power. They also cause property damage, loss of water supply, and heat source. Earthquakes can cause massive damage to property, loss of life. Populated areas the hardest hit because of falling debris and damage to infrastructure. Volcano suffocation is the number one cause of death caused by erupting volcanoes. Volcanic eruptions trigger other natural disasters such as flooding, power outages, and mudslides. Landslides and debris flow. Tsunamis. Tsunami is a tidal wave, usually caused by an earthquake or underwater landslides or underwater volcanic eruptions. Tsunamis can be massively destructive. By the time they reach the shoreline, a tsunami wave could be traveling up to 100 miles an hour. Wildfire, unplanned fire that burns forests, grasslands, or prairies, often started by humans or lightning. Wildfires can cause a chain reaction of destruction, such as flooding, power outages, and transportation disruptions. And I've got a link here. You can go over to an in-depth discussion of the 12 different types of natural disasters and other hazards. So some additional things to think about. Some of these are pretty, I'm trying to think of the word for it. It's not, some of the stuff we have going on right now, we've been dealing with it. So pandemic, epidemic. Pandemic occurs when a disease like influenza spreads throughout an entire country or nation. Epidemic refers to an increase, often sudden, in the number of cases of an infectious disease in a specific area, so it's localized. Civil unrest. Wow. Like, I would have thought this was a little bit crazy and post-apocalyptic 2 months ago, and now it doesn't feel so crazy. Anyway. If you live in an urban area, I suggest strongly prepping food, water, and have some kind of personal protection, if you know what I mean. Imagine being one of those people that's living in the 36 square block of Seattle, and there's no police and there are no emergency services. Because if there's a call for someone, let's say somebody gets shot or beat up or something like that, if the police are the first responders, so if they don't show up and clear the area, the paramedics, the firemen, they're not going to come to the scene. So without the police as first responders, then you're basically without rule of law. That's what it's called. It kind of blows my mind. So in Seattle, buildings have been burned to the ground. Police and private citizens have been attacked. What if you didn't have an emergency food or water, and you're living in that neighborhood right now? Or what if somebody was trying to kick your door in? You'd be walking through a crowd of angry people, and they can do whatever they want to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't care how big you are, how tough you are, or what kind of skills you have. Even if you have a gun, you're not taking on a crowd. Seattle, or rather the Twin Cities, 570 businesses were burned to belay that. 570 businesses were damaged by vandalism, and 67 were burned to the ground. And most of those buildings were from people in the local community that had worked years and years. Most of them were not chain restaurants or big corporations. So prepare for situations where you can't or don't want to leave your house. So if you live in an urban area, just plan ahead, know what you're going to do, know what your options are. And if you can, move out of the city. Okay, world events, that's another thing that might make you want to prep. Most countries now depend on a global supply chain. And so the list of possibilities for things that could affect us personally are kind of endless. Your job could depend on materials or products that are embargoed or cut off. We could have an international event like a war or a trade disruption. We could have famine, crop loss due to weather, pretty much anything. And, you don't have to get all freaky about this, but this is just something that you can consider and you can think about. Health issues or disability. You never know if you or someone in your family is going to come down with a long-term illness. rising medical bills, lost hours at work, or your attention's just needed to provide assistance for a family member or a loved one. Job loss or long-term unemployment is a good reason to prep. From CEO to factory worker, you don't know from day to day if you're going to have a job tomorrow. For whatever reason, you may find yourself out of work, and it's good to know that you and yours will be eating. Your car could break down, your refrigerator could stop working, AC or heater needs repair. Just put anything that could go wrong with your house or your rental or your car or your transportation or anything that you depend on daily for your existence and to make your income. And if that all of a sudden disappears, where are you going to be? Economic decline, prices go up and availability goes down, jobs are lost. Economic decline is a good reason to start gardening. Even if you don't grow and preserve a bunch of food, at least you can learn the skills to do it. Be prepared so you don't have to stand in a Depression-era soup line. Friend or family in distress, I think we already covered that a little bit, so it's kind of redundant. But are you in a position to render aid to friends or family? Is that something that you want to be able to do? A stockpile of food is something you can share with others in times of need. Prepping reduces fear and anxiety. Having a stock of food and water gives you some wiggle room. If things go south for whatever reason, you have the time to come up with a plan of action. A stockpile of food and supplies is a stress reliever for this reason. So if you're living on a tight budget and something as small as a transmission going out on your vehicle, I mean, that could be a big deal. So if you can start slowly prepping, it's a good idea. It'll reduce some anxiety. Just have extra food and supplies to fill the gaps for things unseen. The world economy is unpredictable. Anything can happen on a global scale. They say to be truly happy, you need to work within your own circle of influence. I think that's especially true now. I avoid watching the news at all costs and ignore the white noise. But still, even if you try to do that, you're going to be affected by the things going on around the world. So you got to be ready for that. Trade embargoes, warfare, changing tariffs, all these things can affect you where you live. What if the thin veneer of civilization crumbles? We've got so used to running water, grocery stores, quick shops, and instant availability that we think that they'll be there without disruption. And that's not always the case. And I think some of the stuff that's going on right now makes that crystal clear. We discount how quickly things can head south. It doesn't take that much to destabilize the food chain, local government, or law enforcement. Protect yourself by prepping. Supply lines fail. When you have a functioning highway and rail system and the power's on, you don't think twice about it. But things like national catastrophe or nationwide civil unrest can turn the taps off at a moment's notice. Police and or emergency response can be overwhelmed. The governor of a state or the president can call the National Guard, the National Guard during riots, but it takes days to get logistics in place. And it seems to me that lately political maneuvering has put residents at risk, and it's probably going to get worse over time. Self-reliance. Prep to be self-reliant. Being self-reliant is good for you, for your sense of self-worth and just how you move through the world. Something is uplifting about having the ability to take care of you and yours when no one else can. Gardening is good for what ails you, and it's good for your family. Prepping is good if you're thinking about retiring. Start gardening, canning, learn homesteading skills, pay off debt, retire early. If you're producing a majority of your food, your expenses go way down. Reducing your debt and being self-sufficient also reduces stress and gives you more freedom to live the life that you want. There's historic precedent for prepping, like so much of it that we could pretty much target or talk about any civilization in the history of the world. So prepping didn't used to be the exception, it was the rule. My grandmother was a Depression-era survivor, and she knew what it was like to go to bed hungry. Every year I went to her house for the summer and saw how much work she did to prep and harvest her garden and to preserve her own bounty. This kind of work ethic and thinking was how everybody did it. If you wanted to eat in winter, you canned food in the summer. Quality of life is increased if you're prepping. Imagine working in the garden outside in the sun, keeping physically fit. I just got done moving a dump truck full of wood chips with a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow, and I can tell you what, that was some serious exercise. And I'm a strong believer in mind-body connection, so I don't mean that in kind of a weird, esoteric sort of way, but more like if you are exercising, you just feel better. My mind is brighter, I think clearer, and I tend to have a more positive attitude if I'm exercising regularly. So prepping can give you a means to attain that. Eat healthy fruits and vegetables grown by your own hands. Improve what you eat. Maximize skills like cider making, food canning, and seed saving. Strengthen the bonds and friendships by working closely with others. Knowledge is power when it comes to survival. The more you know, the safer and freer you will be. Another reason to prep: technological hazards, hazardous material incidents. So you want to prepare for emergencies caused by accidents involving hazardous materials like explosives, flammables, poisons, or radioactive material. These types of emergencies can happen anywhere along the supply chain from production to disposal. Transportation of hazardous cargo, I think this is where the real danger lies. There's all kinds of chemicals going all over the United States every day by rail and by truck. I actually think we're kind of lucky that we don't have more incidents regarding transportation and hazardous cargo. And when I talk about hazardous cargo, I'm talking about chemicals like chlorine that can turn to phosgene gas when heated, or methyl isocyanate, which killed 2,200 people in Bhopal, India. And that chemical is regularly transported via rail. Dam failures. There are approximately 84,000 dams in the United States that hold back 17% of the river water in the country. And many of these dams are small and don't pose a huge risk, but some of them are quite large. Munition factories. I tried to find out how many of these are in the United States and where they are. I couldn't really get a clear answer. I'm thinking if you live by a munitions factory, you're going to know it. What can happen if a factory makes bombs and munitions? I mean, yeah, you can have a big boom. Petroleum refineries, there are 135 petroleum refineries in the U.S. Chemical plants, 13,500 chemical plants in the United States. Natural gas farms, there's 1,793 of those. Power plants, there are 9,719 power plants. Nuclear power plant emergencies, there are 96 operating commercial nuclear reactors at 58 nuclear power plants in the United States. Terrorist acts that lead to disaster, explosions, bioterrorism, chemical threats, nuclear blasts. So those are the 37 reasons why prepping is not a waste of time. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this. If you have any questions or suggestions, just leave me a message on the website, readysquirrel.com, or in the comments below. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.